2005 Honda Pilot front brake pads and machine rotors. I'm Brian Essick from How To Automotive. I'm going to walk you through the steps of doing it. What you need to do is get your vehicle up in the air. If you're doing this at home, use floor jacks and jack stands and remove your front wheels. Okay, now that we got our wheels off, on the bottom bolt of the caliper, which is a 12mm bolt, we're going to remove that bolt. So after removing the bottom bolt, you can just grab the calipers like this and rotate it up, and then you're going to push it in towards the inside of the car like that, and pop the little pin out, and now you can set it up on top of the suspension. Next, we need to remove the caliper bracket here, and the way we're going to do that is on the back side here. We're going to remove the 17mm bolt here and the 17mm bolt here. I'm going to use my impact gun here just for speed, but if you don't have that, you can use regular hand tools will work. If you got the bracket off, you're just going to set this aside for now. We're going to do a little prep work and cleaning on this in a few minutes. We're going to get our rotor off and get it on the brake lathe. And to do that, you're going to need an impact screwdriver. So the rotor has two Phillips screws in it holding the rotor onto the hub, and these kind of get stuck and they get stuck inside the rotor, so it requires an impact screwdriver to get them out. If you try to get these out with a regular screwdriver, you'll just strip out the Phillips screw and you'll never get them out. You have to drill them out. So you take the impact screwdriver and then you strike the end of it with a hammer, and with your other hand you twist it at the same time, and it also has a mechanism inside the screwdriver here that it'll turn when you strike it with the hammer. I'll leave a link for this in the description of this video if you guys need to pick this up. Now that you got the screws out, the rotor is still most likely going to be adhered to the hub itself. It kind of gets a little rust will build up on it, and it won't allow it to come off. If you're lucky, you can slide it off. But if this happens to you, I'll show you how to get it out. Now on your rotor, there's going to be two holes that are threaded, and they're 8mm by 125 threads. So you find a bolt that's 8 by 125, and you can screw it into the hole. Then you can just run the bolt in, and it'll pop the rotor off the hub. Next, what we need to do before we machine these rotors is we need to determine if they're thick enough. So you're going to need a brake caliper mic like this, and you're going to measure the thickness of the rotor, take your reading. Sometimes the readings are actually stamped on the rotor itself. If you're lucky, you can read it and you can determine if your rotor is thick enough. If not, you can look it up in a book like this. It's called the Bendix brake book. You can get these, they're available at a lot of automotive type stores, and they're not that expensive. If you're doing brakes all the time, definitely want to invest in a book like this. Or if you're just doing it for the first time in your driveway and you're just doing your own brakes, you can call your local part supplier, and they should be able to help you out with the minimal thickness on the rotor. We'll also leave a link in the description for the brake caliper if you guys need to pick that up. Before we chuck it up into the brake lathe, you want to take a little sandpaper or a die grinder with a Scotch-Brite pad like this and buff off some of the surface rust here on where it mounts on the hub. So you just quickly buff off the rust, and you'll do that on both sides. And also buff off the hub too. Buff off the surface rust. Now you can chuck it up into your brake lathe and do a light cut. For those that are doing it at home and you're not going to have a brake lathe, what I recommend you do is you take the two rotors, drive them down to your local repair shop, and ask them to machine them for you. They'll usually charge you a small little fee, but it's worth having the rotors machined. That way you have a nice smooth brake pedal. When you go down there, you just tell them the year, make, model of the car. They can even measure them out for you if you don't have the tools. And you drop them off. Maybe a half hour later, you come back by, pick them up, and then you're ready to reinstall them. After your rotor is finished machining, you're just going to line up the screw holes with the rotor slide it on and reattach your Phillips screws. You can just tighten these by hand. So now we're going to prep our caliper bracket here and our new brake pads. And the way we do that is we're going to take it all apart here and clean everything up. So a lot of brake pads come with new hardware. If they do, I just recommend you just change this out, put the new hardware on. If it doesn't come with it, like these particular pads I got today didn't come with it, so you're going to use a wire brush like this, and you're going to scrub all the channels and everything and clean everything out. Okay, so now that you got everything wire brushed and cleaned out here on the hardware, or inspect it. If it's pitted or damaged in any way, then I recommend you order a kit and put it on. Next thing we're going to do is this top pin here that we didn't take out. We're going to slide this out. You're just going to grab it. Peel the boot back like this, and then you're going to slide the pin out like this, and then we're going to wipe off all this old grease. So after wiping down the pin, the old grease, then what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of what we use here at the shop is a grease called Seal Glide, and we're going to take a couple of dabs of this, and we're going to put it on the pin and work it in there, and so it's well lubricated like this. And then we're going to put it back into the bracket, and we're going to work it back and forth and make sure that this goes in and out smooth and freely like that. And once it does, you're just going to keep pushing it to the boot re-secures on it. That portion of it's done. And the reason why we use this particular brand of Seal Glide is it's a silicone based lubricant, and it doesn't, when the brakes get hot, it doesn't break down and run off. So it's specifically designed for working with brakes. Now on the caliper itself, we can do the same thing. We can just, but this time we're just going to pop the boot completely off, and now we're going to wipe this pin down, wipe it off with a clean rag, and then reapply a thin layer of that Seal Glide grease onto this pin. The boot that came off here, we can reinstall it into the caliper bracket. Just push that boot back in there. Sometimes when you take that pin off, this boot will stay in here. You don't have to transfer it back over, but if it's stuck on the pin, just take it off and put it back onto the caliper bracket like that. So now we're ready to put the bracket back onto the spindle and over the rotor, but before we do, we're going to put a little of this blue thread locker. It's made by Permatex. This it's like a little glue that we put on the threads, and what it does is it prevents these bolts from backing back off and prevent your brake caliper from falling off. So after putting a few dabs on the blue thread locker on the bolts, we're going to take the bracket here. Put the bracket back on. You can go ahead and tighten the two bolts here and here at the 79 foot. Now you can take your outer brake pad and you can slide it onto the caliper bracket like that. What I like to do is match up the inner pad, brake pad, because it has the little squealer here. This little device here, as the pad wears down, it'll touch the rotor and make it squeak and make you want to take your car in to get it repaired. So you want to match it up with the way the original one came off, and you'll just line up the little slots and slide it on. Now that the brake pads are on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of my Seal Glide brake caliper grease here. I'm going to put a little bit on my finger here, and I'm going to put a little thin layer on the back of the shims here, on the inner and the outer brake pads. And what this does is it helps reduce vibrations and reduce squeaks. You just want to make sure you don't get the grease on the surface of the rotor or the surface of the inside of the pads. Now that that's all done, we need to push our piston back into the bore of the caliper here and put it back on. But before we do that, I'm going to show you a little trick. What we're going to do is we're going to lower the vehicle down, and we're going to remove a couple ounces of brake fluid from the master cylinder. And the reason why is we're not going to open this bleeder screw. We're going to leave it shut, and we're going to push this piston back in. And what that does is it pushes the brake fluid back up the line and back into the master cylinder. And if the master cylinder has ever been topped off, it'll overflow and spill into the engine bay. So when we do this and push the fluid back up in the master cylinder, when we're done, we're going to pump the brake pedal, and what it's going to do is going to push the fluid back into the line and back into the caliper and push the piston out where it makes contact with the shoes. And doing it this way without opening the bleeder screw, it won't get any air in the system, and we won't have to bleed the brakes out. So I'm just going to use a little turkey baster and suck some of the fluid out, like 1 or 2 ounces out. Okay, to push the piston back in, I'm just going to use a little C-clamp like this, and I use one of the old brake pads. I put it in there, and I'm just going to turn it until you see the piston here bottom out. The piston is pushed back into the bore of the caliper. You're just going to take the caliper like this, and you're going to make sure, see how the brake hose is twisted? You're going to make sure that it's not twisted like that. Then you're going to stab the pin in the boot, pull it in until it all the way seats, pull it towards you, and then you're going to rotate the caliper downwards over the brake pads like that. Then you get on the inside here, you're going to push the pin in until the caliper seats. Then we're going to take the bolt, and we're going to put a little bit of the blue thread locker on the threads of the bolt, and I will leave a link in the description for this. Now you're going to start your bolt, and you may have to spin the pin here, spin the pin, it has like a little flat spot on the pin. So you want to spin it till it lines up right, and then you start your bolt. And you're going to torque this bolt down to 29. I also recommend that you check the torque on the top bolt of the caliper. Now that you're done with this side, you're going to do the exact same process on the other side. And you're going to put your front wheels on, torque those down to 79 foot-pounds. Now that you got the wheels back on and torqued down, you're going to lower the vehicle down. What you're going to do, you're going to pump the brake pedal 6 or 7 times and get all that fluid back into the calipers. And then you're going to recheck your fluid level here and top it off if you need to. And what you want to feel is a nice firm pedal. So after pumping your brake pedal and you feel like it's soft and spongy, then I would recommend you bleed it, but you should not have to bleed it after doing it like this. And that'll complete the brake job on a 2005 Honda Pilot. I'm Brian Essick from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching my videos. Encourage you to subscribe. Invite you to head over to the howtoautomotive.com website for more valuable videos like this. In the description of this video will be links to all the tools and products. Thank you again for watching.